Hello again, everyone. We are back to our regularly scheduled read alouds now, but I want to review a little bit before we jump into our read aloud today. We're doing questions before and after today. In our last read aloud, we learned about Lars and Karen. Why did they choose to immigrate to the United States? And why did they choose the Midwest? Why did they immigrate to the United States? And why did they choose to settle in the Midwest? They wanted to have their own farmland. Remember, we've talked about the difference between the word immigration, spelled with an I, and the word emigration, spelled with an E. So Lars and Karen emigrated from Sweden, which means that they left Sweden. They emigrated from Sweden and immigrated to the United States. What do we call problems in people's home countries that make them want to emigrate or leave their home country? We call those push factors, because they are pushing those people out of their home countries. Some common push factors are problems with the government, or not having enough money or job opportunities, or not having freedoms. We talked about the Murphy family, who emigrated from Ireland and immigrated to the United States. What was a push factor in Ireland that caused them to immigrate to the US? Their big push factor was the potato blight, the blight on their potato crops that killed all of their crops. We talked about places where people arrive in the US when they do immigrate. We talked about 2 immigration centers where people were admitted to the US. What were those 2 immigration centers called? You got it. Ellis Island in New York and Angel Island in San Francisco in California. What statue was outside of Ellis Island that welcomed people to America? If you said this lovely lady, you are correct. This is called the Statue of Liberty. She was a gift to the United States from the country France, and she is a symbol of freedom and welcome for all new people coming to America. All right. We talked about the phrase e pluribus unum a lot so far. We've talked about that phrase over and over. Remind me, what does e pluribus unum mean? E pluribus unum means out of many, one, which is a really good model for the United States, because the United States was built on immigrants and immigration. We had many different people from many different places that came together to form one nation, the United States. We read a couple of fictional stories today that were made up about immigrants, and it described what life would be like. And we learned about some real people, like Charles Steinmetz, who came and helped bring electricity to many people. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about mosaics. Mosaics kind of go along with our e pluribus unum phrase. A mosaic is a picture, a decorative design, that is made from many small tiles, stones, or other objects that are placed together to form one picture. So out of many different stones or tiles, we have one picture. Each stone or tile is different, but they all combine together to form something beautiful. Our immigrants in the United States are just like these tiles. They are all very different. They have different customs and different traditions, but they all come together to form one beautiful picture that makes up the United States. As we're reading today, make sure you're paying attention to what we're learning about immigration. We'll talk about how immigration is similar today and in the 1880s to the 1920s. So we've been talking mostly about immigration, early immigration in the United States. Today we'll compare it to what immigration in the United States is like today. But before we do that, we do need to do our vocabulary words.
Settlers. Settlers are people who make their homes in a new region or place. Settlers, a group of immigrants from Europe, made their way westward. Descendants. Descendants are people who are related to earlier ancestors. When Marco's grandfather moved to the United States as a young boy, he knew his descendants would be American citizens. So your family members who lived before you are called ancestors. You are your ancestors' descendants. Famine. A famine is a great shortage of food. The lack of water over many years produced a famine in the country. The United States is a nation of immigrants. Many of the people who live in the United States today left their homelands and other countries to come to America. Those who are not immigrants themselves can probably point to ancestors who came to the United States as immigrants in earlier times. Some can point to a mother or father who immigrated to the United States. They might have a grandparent or great-grandparent who came to the United States as an immigrant, while others have to reach back a little farther in their family's history. The people who have lived in North America the longest are Native Americans. Their ancestors are the first known people to live in what is now called the United States. They made their way from Asia into North America thousands of years ago. The Native Americans spread out across North and South America. Today, many Native American descendants live all across the United States. For many years, the people of Europe did not know that the Americas existed. Europe and the Americas were two separate worlds. The voyages of Christopher Columbus in 1492 changed that. After these voyages, Europeans began to settle in the Native American lands of North and South America. The earliest immigrants came from a handful of countries in Northern Europe. Many came from England and Scotland, but there were settlers from other countries as well. Some came from France and Spain. Others came from Germany and the Netherlands. They settled down and made their homes in this new land called America. Many of the early settlers who fought in the Revolutionary War could point to ancestors from one of these 6 countries. Later, immigrants began to come to the United States from other countries in Europe. And later still, they began to arrive from many other parts of the world. Why do people become immigrants? Why do they leave the countries where they were born? And why have so many been drawn to the United States? Usually, there is something that pushes immigrants out of their homelands, and usually there is something that pulls them to the United States. So remember, we call those push factors and pull factors. The Pilgrims who came to New England in the 1600s felt both pushed out of their homeland and pulled to the United States, even though it wasn't called the United States at the time. They were pushed to leave England because the English king would not allow them to practice their religion in the way that seemed best to them. They were pulled to North America because they believed they would have religious freedom there. The Scottish people who came to America in the late 1700s also felt push and pull factors. Many of them were pushed off the land they farmed by landowners who wanted to use the land to raise sheep. They were pulled to the American colonies because in America they could get farmland of their own. Many of the Irish who came to the United States in the 1840s and 50s came because of a famine in Ireland. All across Ireland, potatoes went bad. They turned black and shriveled up. They were not good to eat, and many Irish starved. Many were pushed out of their homeland by the famine. The Irish heard there were farms and jobs in the United States. These stories helped pull them to the United States. So we learned a word for that famine in Ireland in one of our earlier lessons. We called that the potato blight. Remember, a blight is the sudden death of crops due to disease. The blight, or the sudden death of those crops, caused a famine or shortage of food in Ireland. Many of the Chinese immigrants who came to the United States in the 1840s and 50s were pushed out of their homeland because they were poor. Some were pulled to the United States by the prospect or possibility of finding gold in the mountains of California. Others were drawn here by jobs building railroads. Most of these immigrants saw America as a land of opportunity. It was a place where separatists had the opportunity to practice their religion in their own way. It was a place where the Irish would have an opportunity to work on the railroads or work in their communities in other jobs. Many groups were able to own their own land and provide for their families. Today, immigrants continue to come to the United States from all over the world. From countries such as Mexico, China, India, the Philippines, the Dominican Republic, Ethiopia, and Russia. Over 1 million immigrants arrive each year from these and many other countries. That is about 3,000 or 4,000 people every day. This read aloud will last for about 15 minutes. By the time it is finished, 30 or 40 people will have immigrated to the United States. Today's immigrants no longer come into the United States through Ellis Island and Angel Island. Many immigrants today arrive by plane, though some come by boat, by car, or even on foot. Many people leave their homelands because they are not able to live and work in safe and healthy conditions. Some people must leave their countries because of problems in the government or the dangers of war. People all around the world continue to view the United States as a land of opportunity. They see the United States as a place where people can make a new start in life. They can get an education, find jobs and medical care, and create a new home for themselves and their families. They can contribute their skills and hard work to the communities in which they live. As in the past, new immigrants still face challenges or difficulties in their new country. Today's immigrants must still say goodbye to loved ones in their homelands and make new friends in the United States. It takes time to become familiar with new ways of living. The food, the language, the weather, and ways of getting around may be different. Sometimes immigrants can use help getting used to a new life. It is still common for immigrants to settle in cities. Many immigrants move to places where others from their homelands have settled and can help the newcomers find jobs and places to live. Here, they can continue to share familiar customs and traditions, even as they learn other ways of doing things in their new country. In this way, new and delicious foods are introduced. People can enjoy a variety of festivals and traditions from other countries. New forms of art and music become part of our communities. Workers bring new ideas and skills to their places of work. This is a picture of a nickel. Pay close attention to the words on top of that nickel. What do those words say? Those words say e pluribus unum. We have been talking a lot about that phrase and how it is a motto for the United States. Do you remember what e pluribus unum means? E pluribus unum is a Latin phrase that means out of many, one. One of the powerful ideas about the United States is that it is a country where people from many different countries join together and form one nation. From many, one. You can think of the United States as a mosaic of people from different countries. The place where people come from is an important part of who they are. Each person brings interesting customs, new talents and ideas, and hard work to the mosaic. Like the tiles of a mosaic, each person contributes to making one nation. From many, one. There are many songs that celebrate the unity or oneness of the American people. One of them is This Land Is Your Land by Woody Guthrie. You may know some of the words to this song. This land is your land, this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me. California and the redwood forest are on the west coast. New York and the Gulf Stream waters are on the east coast. Most of America lies in between. Woody Guthrie was trying to say that the land belongs to all Americans. It is not just my country, it is also your country, wherever you may live in the United States, and wherever your ancestors may have come from. From the earliest Native Americans, and those ancestors who came long ago from other continents, such as Europe, Africa, and Asia throughout history until today, people have come to the land that is now the United States for many reasons. Many people who live in the United States today are immigrants themselves. Others have parents or grandparents who were immigrants. Still others have ancestors whom they never knew who immigrated to America long ago. More than almost anywhere else on planet Earth, the United States is a nation of immigrants and their descendants, a beautiful mosaic of people who have come to America from all over the world.
All right, my friends, I have got some questions about what we talked about and learned today. Today, did you have any new information that you learned about immigration? Turn and tell whoever is helping you today something new that you learned today. What's one new thing you learned today? We have been talking a lot about early immigration in America in the late 1800s and early 1900s. America was built on immigrants and on immigration. At the very beginning, we had pilgrims who immigrated from Europe that helped start our country. But of course, they were not the first ones in our country. They were not the first people in that land. What do we call people who were here who first lived in America, who were already living here? We call them Native Americans. The word native means that it is where you are from. So if you live in Spanish Fork, you would be a native of Spanish Fork. So we call these people Native Americans because they are native to America. They were the first people that lived here. What were some of the push factors that caused the earliest European and Asian immigrants to come to the Americas? There are a lot of ways you can answer that one. Lots of different push factors, and it was different for each person. But some of the big ones were lack of money or food, not enough job opportunities in their homelands, no religious freedom, and not having the ability to own their own land. What are some of the difficulties that immigrants face when they move to a new country? What difficulties or challenges do immigrants face when they come to a new country? Some difficulties that a lot of immigrants face. A lot of them came from countries where English is not the language that is spoken. So they had to learn a new language. They had to find new jobs. They had to learn to make new friends and get along with their neighbors. They had to find places to live and learn how to survive in this new culture. At the end of our read aloud today, we heard the phrase that the United States is a mosaic of immigrants. What do you think that means? It's our mosaic that we talked about at the beginning. What do you think it means that the United States is a mosaic of immigrants? Just like how each of these tiles are different immigrants from different places that immigrate to the United States all have different customs and cultures, and they bring those differences with them, but they also find a way to become part of the whole of the United States of America. So they bring their own differences and their own cultures, and they adopt some of the culture of the United States to create one cohesive, beautiful picture. Cohesive means that it is all together, that it works together, and it makes sense. All right, my friends, we have got a writing assignment today. I'm going to jump on my computer and I'll show you what that will look like. Okay, our assignment today is a little bit different than most of our assignments that we've had in this domain and knowledge. For our assignment today, we are going to need to use our imaginations. I want you to take a minute to use your imagination to put yourself in the shoes of an immigrant in the United States. There are a couple things you'll want to think about. I want you to imagine
that you have just immigrated to the United States, I want you to consider when you immigrated to the United States. We shared a lot of stories about people who immigrated during the years 1880 and 1920. And today we talked about people that immigrate to the United States in modern times today. Think about when you want to imagine you immigrated to the United States. Was it in the past or was it now in modern times? I also want you to think about what country you emigrated from. Did you emigrate from Ireland or China or Italy or maybe Brazil? I want you to think of a country that you emigrated from. When you have decided those things, remember we're using our imagination to pretend you are that person. You are that immigrant that came from whatever country you chose and are now living in the United States. On this assignment, we're going to come up to our hamburger menu with the 3 lines, and we're going to say rotate clockwise. We are going to write a letter today. Our letters are going to be postmarked from the United States. A postmark is a special stamp that post offices use that tell the reader when the letter was mailed and where the letter came from. So remember, you are imagining that you are an immigrant. I want you to think about friends or family that you left in your home country. You are going to write a letter to them. Now, the first step in our writing process is always to plan. So that's all we're going to do today is plan what we're going to say in our letter. The goal of our letters, or the purpose of our letters, is to tell those friends and family members that we left behind what our life in the United States is like. So be thinking about where you're from and when. Are you imagining that you emigrated in 1845, the year of the potato blight in Ireland? Or are you imagining that you emigrated today in 2021? In that letter, you are going to tell your friends and family members all about your life here in the United States and how it might be different from the country you came from. One thing you might want to consider, so I'm going to have you work on filling this out as we're talking about it. And of course, once I'm done talking, you'll have plenty of time to work on it as well, and you may always go back and rewind if you need to. One thing you'll want to include in your letter is where you live. Remember, we talked about how a lot of immigrants in the past and today still choose to settle in large cities like New York or Chicago or San Francisco. Oh, forgotten this. Oh, and I forgot to see. There we go. I got ahead of myself. And we talked about how many immigrants also chose to settle in the Midwest. So the Midwest included, let me write Midwest, included states, places in states like Wisconsin and Minnesota. If you live in a city, it might be a good idea to consider whether or not you live in an ethnic neighborhood like Chinatown or Little Italy, depending on what country you chose to emigrate from. Take a minute to think about what city you're from, and if you're from one of those big cities, do you have a specific neighborhood that you live in based on where you're from. If you still need more time, friends, which I'm sure many of you will, I'm going to have you pause while you think about where you're from, or not where you're from, but where you're living now. And then hit play when you're ready for our next one. The next thing we need to consider is what you do for work. We talked about how many immigrants work in restaurants or in shops. If you immigrated in the past, that might affect what jobs you had as well. Remember, Chinese immigrants often took lower paying jobs that were dangerous. Many Chinese and Irish immigrants also worked on the railroads, the Transcontinental Railroad, laying track. Think about what you are doing for work as an immigrant in the United States. What do you do for work in the United States? More job opportunities was a large pull factor, both in the past and today. That might be one of the reasons that you wanted to come to the United States, was a specific job that you wanted to have. Again, while you think about where you work, and while you're filling out that section of your planning guide, go ahead and pause and hit play again when you're ready for the next one. Our next one is sights. You'll want to tell your friends and family all about the cool things that you're seeing in the United States. One important site that we talked about that's outside of Ellis Island in New York was the Statue of Liberty. The Statue of Liberty was a gift from the country France and became a symbol of welcome. It was a sign of welcome for immigrants to the United States. Other sites that you might see might depend on where you chose to live. If you chose to live in the Midwest, you might see lots of sprawling farmland. But if you live in New York or San Francisco, you probably live in a very busy city with lots of people walking around and pushing carts to sell things on or rushing from place to place. Notice that on sites and over here on feelings, which we'll get to next, we have a lot more lines. These ones, we have a better chance to be really descriptive about what we're seeing. I want you to do your best to fill up as many of these as you can. On these ones, we only had one thing to pick, or two if we lived in an ethnic neighborhood. You just had to pick one place or one thing to do for work, but I want you to see if you can come up with 3 different sites that you can see where you live in the United States and a little bit of description about them. And we'll do the same thing with feelings when we get to feelings. For now, go ahead and pause this video while you think about some sites that you might see and hit play when you are ready for that last section. Our last section is our feeling section. We've talked a lot about immigration and how it felt for immigrants to leave their countries and to enter the United States. In most cases, both in the past and in the present,
Do people usually feel 100% good about immigration or 100% bad about it? No. Even though they are often leaving their country due to problems in their country, they still face problems in the United States. Many immigrants have what we call mixed feelings. That means that there are some things that they like about living here and some things that they do not like about living here. Those mixed feelings, we can get positive feelings from the opportunities that America brought to many immigrants. Remember, it was called the land of opportunity because many people had better opportunities for jobs or homes or owning land than they would have in their home country. Negative feelings might come from hostility that immigrants faced both in the past and in the present. Remember, many Americans, in the past and present both, were worried that immigrants were taking jobs that American people needed. So they treated them with hostility or even violence at times. Of course, we know that this is not okay. We need to be kind and welcoming to all people. But it is something that did happen and does happen still. So that can cause some of those negative feelings in our mixed feelings. Think about yourself, your imagined immigrant self. What good things are you feeling about living in the United States? What are some good things about it? And see if you can think of some negative things as well. Tell me how you are feeling about living in the United States. Again, go ahead and pause this until you've got that last section filled out and hit play when you are finished. All right. We will use this plan in tomorrow's assignment, in our next assignment, to help write. We are going to use this to help guide our writing for our letter. Because we will need to use this one again, it is very important that you either print your work today or save it. Oh, there it is. You can save a digital copy of it by coming up here to the Save button, or you can print it so that you have a physical copy of it. Make sure you keep this paper for our writing in our next lesson, but after you've saved it, I want you to make sure that you still turn it in. That is all we are doing today. Again, we'll do the rest of our writing tomorrow. I will see you guys then.